I still remember the early mornings, the quiet hum of the alarm before the sun even rose, and the endless days filled with work and worry. My name is Maggie, and I have spent my life trying to give my son, David, a future brighter than the one I had. Raising him alone was not easy. Every choice, every sacrifice, every sleepless night was for him. I worked jobs that left my hands rough and my body tired, yet my heart always held hope. I wanted him to have more than I ever did. Education, opportunities, respect, and a life without the limitations I grew up with. But as the years went by, I began to notice something I had not expected. David, the boy I had poured everything into, began to distance himself from the very world I worked so hard to protect him from. It was not rebellion. Not exactly. It was something subtler, more painful. He was ashamed. Ashamed of our modest home, our modest meals, our modest life. And when he fell in love and planned to marry, I could see the fear in his eyes, the fear that the truth about where we came from might not fit into the polished, wealthy world of his fiancée's family. I wanted to step in, to shield him, but I also realized that no matter what I did, the path forward was his to walk. I had built a foundation for him, yes, but now he had to decide whether to stand tall on it or hide from it. In this story, you will see the complexities of love, sacrifice, and the sometimes painful truths that family life brings. If you want to hear more about our journey, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I promise there is more to our story than meets the eye. Every detail, every choice, every moment shapes who we become. I watched David step further into a world I barely recognized. A world filled with glittering facades and high expectations that seemed to choke him with every passing day. At first, it was small things, the occasional dinner at a restaurant far beyond our means, a wardrobe that carried price tags I could never afford, the careless way he spoke about his success as if it had appeared overnight. But soon, the lies grew heavier, more dangerous, and I began to see the cracks in the polished image he was building. He misrepresented his background, glossing over the modest life we had shared and painting himself as someone who had always belonged to that affluent circle. The first time I discovered the extent of his financial recklessness, my heart sank into a place I did not know existed. David had begun borrowing money, first from friends, then from people I did not know. And eventually, he started dipping into accounts that were not his. He was living beyond his means, not realizing or perhaps not caring about the consequences of every decision he made. The very principles I had tried to instill in him, the value of honesty, hard work, and integrity, seemed to vanish like smoke in the wind. Yet despite the growing fear and anger inside me, I could not let him falter. I had given him life, and I could not abandon him now. Even as the cost threatened to crush me, I began to secretly cover his debts, one by one. Shuffling funds, negotiating quietly, and mortgaging assets I had spent decades building. Every signature on a loan, every whispered conversation with a bank official, every sleepless night spent calculating how to keep him afloat, it was my hidden burden. I felt a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and an unwavering determination that only a parent could understand. Each sacrifice I made was both a shield for him and a silent scream of frustration at the choices he refused to acknowledge. I was protecting him from consequences that he would eventually have to face, but for now, I chose to absorb the storm, to carry the weight that was not mine alone. Watching him move through parties and social gatherings, the way he laughed, the way he presented himself as someone untouchably successful, I felt a strange combination of pride and despair. Pride, because he had the charm, the ambition, and the confidence to navigate that world. despair. Because he was doing it at the expense of truth and at the cost of our stability. The tension between us was unspoken yet omnipresent. He had no idea how far I had gone to keep his world intact, and I struggled with whether to confront him or continue my silent rescue. Every day, I questioned if my interventions were helping him grow or simply enabling the lies that now defined him. There were nights when I would sit alone in the quiet of our home, staring at the papers and statements, and wonder how it had come to this. How had the boy who once ran into my arms for comfort become a man who hid from his own roots? I had imagined his success differently, grounded in honesty and self-respect, not on a web of fabrications that threatened to unravel at any moment. And yet, even in the chaos, I felt an undeniable bond, a thread that tethered me to him no matter the distance his choices had created. I realized that love, true parental love, was often silent, invisible, and exhausting, but it persisted because it had to. I carried on. Mortgaging, negotiating, sacrificing in ways that left me drained but determined, silently hoping that one day, David would recognize the price of his deception, see the truth behind the world he had constructed, and understand the depth of a mother's love that refused to abandon him, no matter the storm he had created. The day I first met Jessica Thornton and her parents, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and curiosity, as if stepping into a world I had always observed from the outside but never truly belonged to. David had painted a picture of elegance, wealth, an influence that he had only begun to scratch at, and now I was standing face to face with the reality of it. Jessica herself was charming, her laughter effortless, her manners polished. The kind of person who seemed to glide through life without effort, while her parents exuded a quiet authority, the kind of confidence that came from generations of privilege. I smiled. I nodded. I complimented, and I played the role I had promised myself I could perform, all while a knot of unease tightened in my chest. I had to keep David's lies intact, had to be the invisible support that made his story believable, and every word I spoke carried the weight of deception, a weight that pressed harder with every passing moment. As the conversation flowed, I noticed the little things that made the Thornton family both intimidating and fascinating: the way they spoke with certainty, the subtle exchanges of understanding between them, the expectations they carried in their gazes, and the unspoken judgments that lingered in the air. I was careful, measured, polite, a mirror reflecting David's fabricated image, all while my mind raced with thoughts of what it would take to keep up the illusion. I could see that he had built a fragile tower of pretenses, and each interaction with this world of wealth and refinement threatened to topple it. I could sense the stakes in every smile, every question, every compliment we offered each other, and I felt the crushing weight of responsibility that came with shielding him from exposure. Yet beneath the surface, I felt a growing unease, a subtle but persistent tension that gnawed at me. I was enabling him, I realized, and each smile I forced, each polite laugh I offered, each lie I allowed to slide unchallenged was a thread in the web that now defined our lives. I could see the shadows of dishonesty in David's eyes, the careful phrasing of his words, the way he avoided revealing too much, and I understood more clearly than ever the depth of the hole he had dug for himself. There was pride in my chest for the son I had raised, for the cleverness and charm he wielded to navigate this sophisticated world. But there was also a sinking weight, a despair that came from knowing the cost of such a performance was already too high. I began to recognize the subtle toll this burden was taking on me, how every polite gesture and careful answer sapped my energy and clouded my peace of mind. Each time I watched David laugh easily with Jessica's parents, I felt the invisible strain of carrying the truth alone, of being both mother and silent guardian of a story that could crumble at any moment. I wondered how long I could maintain the act, how long I could keep up appearances without letting the growing dishonesty consume us both, and whether the day would come when David's choices would collide with reality in a way that even my sacrifices could not fix. Even as I navigated these dinners, these introductions, these polite exchanges filled with hidden stakes, I could feel the threads of tension weaving tighter around us, a web that connected lies, ambition, and love in ways I had never imagined. I found myself questioning whether the love that had driven me to protect him so fiercely would ultimately save him or simply shield him long enough to make the eventual fall even more devastating. And though I smiled, nodded, and laughed alongside him, I could not shake the awareness that every moment I played along was another silent pact with deception, a pact that weighed on my heart in ways that no words could ease. By the time I left the Thornton estate that evening, the unease had settled into a quiet, persistent ache, a reminder that love sometimes demanded the heaviest sacrifices and that protecting someone from themselves could be both a gift and a curse. I had kept David's story intact for now, but I could feel the rising tide of consequences, the delicate balance between appearance and reality, and the unbearable truth that one day, every lie, no matter how carefully guarded, would demand its reckoning. The night of the formal dinner arrived with a quiet tension that seemed to hang in the air long before we stepped into the grand dining hall. Crystal chandeliers reflected their light across polished wood, and the soft hum of conversation carried a weight of expectation that made my chest tighten. David was at his most confident, his charm sharpened and his posture carefully calculated, ready to impress Jessica and her parents with tales of wealth and influence that existed only in his imagination. I could see it in the way he laughed at his own stories, the subtle pride in his tone, the way he tried to make every gesture appear effortless, and my stomach twisted with unease as I realized how far he had gone to construct this facade. Every anecdote he shared was a thread in a tapestry of lies, and I could feel the danger woven through each word, knowing how easily the truth could unravel everything. As I watched him speak, something inside me shifted, a mixture of sorrow and resolve, the kind that comes when a parent realizes the limits of protection. I had supported him through every misstep, every reckless choice, every borrowed dollar that had been hidden beneath the surface, and I had sacrificed more than I had ever allowed myself to acknowledge. I knew the cost of enabling him, the quiet erosion of my own life in service of his illusions, and yet seeing him so proud of a story that was not ours steered a deep, unavoidable truth. The time had come to confront not just his lies, but the fragile sense of identity he had built on them, and to remind him, and everyone around us, of who we really were. When the moment arrived, it came not with anger but with the steady weight of honesty, the kind that demands attention and refuses to be ignored. I spoke, and the room seemed to grow still, the soft clinking of silverware fading into silence as my words filled the space. I told them of late nights and early mornings, of jobs held and jobs lost, of the sacrifices that had defined our working-class life, the quiet resilience that had carried David to adulthood, and the love that had made it all possible. I shared the truth of mortgages taken to cover debts, of endless hours spent working to provide opportunities, and of the modest means that had shaped every choice we had ever made. Each word I spoke peeled back the layers of deception, exposing not just David's lies, but the courage and struggle that had always been ours. I watched as his expression shifted from surprise to embarrassment, then to shame, and I felt a pang of sadness, a recognition that pride had blinded him to the reality of our lives. There was no malice in my revelation, only the clear light of truth, the kind that illuminates both mistakes and the strength required to overcome them. I saw the Thornton family exchange glances, their initial confusion giving way to understanding, and I realized that the respect we earned tonight would not come from wealth or pretense, but from the honesty and integrity that I had long hoped David would embrace. In that moment, the weight I had carried alone became shared, a bridge between the past and the present, and I sensed a subtle transformation in David, a quiet recognition of what he had nearly lost. I felt pride mingled with sorrow, relief tempered by the knowledge that the road ahead would demand humility and reckoning, and a renewed hope that he might finally understand the true meaning of family, sacrifice, and love. The evening ended not with the illusion of grandeur, but with the unvarnished truth of who we were, and in that truth, I found both strength and a cautious optimism that the lessons learned tonight might shape the man David had the potential to become. The days after the dinner unfolded with a weight that was both inevitable and strangely liberating, the kind of reckoning that comes when illusions are stripped away and the consequences of actions can no longer be avoided. David, once so assured in his web of stories, now moved through the world with a nervous energy that betrayed the unraveling of his carefully constructed image. The messages and calls from Jessica and her parents arrived in a steady stream, polite but firm, each one carrying the unmistakable undertone of disappointment and finality. I could see the tension coil in his shoulders, the certainty that had once defined him giving way to an uncomfortable vulnerability. And I knew that for the first time in his adult life, he was facing the tangible results of his choices without a safety net to catch him. When Jessica came to speak with us, her eyes were steady but tinged with sadness, a reflection of the realization that love and admiration cannot survive in the shadow of dishonesty. She spoke with clarity and composure, explaining that the engagement could not continue. That trust, once broken, could not be mended by apologies alone. As she left, the weight in the room shifted, and I sensed the quiet but profound relief that comes when deception is met with truth, and the burden of pretense is lifted from shoulders that had carried it far too long. In the silence that followed, I felt a strange clarity, a sense of liberation that was as unexpected as it was necessary. The recognition that my role as protector and enabler, though born of love, had obscured the very values I had hoped David would learn. I watched him sit in stunned contemplation, the bravado that had once defined him replaced by a raw, unshielded reflection of fear and regret. And I knew that this was the moment when growth could begin, if he chose to embrace it. The confrontation with reality was unforgiving, but it was honest. And in its honesty lay the opportunity for redemption. I felt the invisible chains that had tied me to his illusions fall away, replaced by a lighter sense of purpose. A renewed understanding that love sometimes means letting go of control, allowing consequences to shape understanding and character, rather than attempting to shield someone from the natural consequences of their actions. As the days passed, I found myself moving through a calm I had not known in years, a quiet confidence that our life, though far from perfect, was rooted in authenticity. I could tend to my own affairs with a focus that had long been divided, no longer consumed by the need to cover debts, soothe the anxieties, or maintain appearances. The relief was not the fleeting satisfaction of vindication, but a deeper, enduring recognition that honesty had the power to heal, and that my son's journey, however painful, could now unfold without the weight of my enabling. David, for his part, began to confront his mistakes with a hesitancy born of humility, the first small gestures of accountability emerging in the wake of humiliation and loss. I observed him navigating these consequences with the tentative steps of someone learning to reconcile ambition with integrity, and I felt a cautious hope, a recognition that the foundations of character are built in moments of reckoning, not comfort. In witnessing this, I understood that my greatest gift had not been the protection from hardship, but the courage to reveal truth, to allow the natural course of life to impart lessons that no deception could teach. By the end of those weeks, the home that had once been a stage for carefully hidden stories became a place of transparency, of quiet reflection and measured growth. I felt a sense of accomplishment not in the avoidance of disaster, but in the embrace of reality, and in that embrace, a freedom that allowed both David and me to step forward unburdened, ready to face the world with honesty, humility, and the hard-won understanding that the bonds of family are strongest when grounded in truth. In the months that followed the difficult confrontation, life settled into a rhythm I had never allowed myself to experience before, a rhythm rooted not in crisis management or endless worry, but in purpose and self-determination. One afternoon, I received a call from Victoria Thornton, Jessica's mother, whose grace and intelligence I had always admired despite the tension that once defined our encounters. She spoke with warmth, acknowledging the strength and ingenuity I had demonstrated in managing complex financial challenges, not only the crises that had surrounded David, but also the broad expertise, the broader ep through years of careful planning, sacrifice, and disciplined decision-making. There was an offer in her voice, one I could scarcely have imagined, a professional collaboration that would allow me to apply my skills to helping middle-class families navigate their finances, secure their futures, and achieve stability in ways that mirrored the lessons I had learned and lived. As I listened, a sense of possibility unfurled within me, one that felt entirely new yet deeply familiar. Like discovering a room in my own home I had never entered but had always known existed. The opportunity was not just financial, it was personal, a chance to reclaim my independence, assert my capabilities, and build a life defined by my own achievements rather than by the endless labor of covering for my son. I could see, with vivid clarity, the impact this work could have, families gaining confidence, planning for their children's education, managing debt without fear, and embracing the dignity that comes with control over one's own resources. For the first time in years, I felt the sweet balance of empowerment and responsibility, a harmony that nourished both my mind and my spirit. As I stepped into this new chapter, I reflected on the long, winding journey that had brought me here, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the moments of quiet despair, and the relentless drive to see my son succeed. Those trials had forged resilience, honed judgment, and cultivated a resourcefulness that I now wielded not merely for survival, but for meaningful impact. Working alongside Victoria, I found a mentor who respected my experience, encouraged my initiative, and celebrated the unique perspective I brought to every challenge. Together, we built programs, workshops, and consultations designed to empower families like mine, to provide practical guidance and emotional reassurance in equal measure, creating ripples of stability and confidence in communities that too often felt adrift. And as I navigated this work, I realized something profound. My journey with David, though painful, had taught me lessons I could never have learned any other way. It had shown me the limits of enabling, the courage required to face truth, and the transformative power of self-reliance. Now, I could channel those lessons outward, turning personal hardship into collective benefit, turning my experience and expertise that lifted others. I felt a quiet pride in my own evolution, a sense of completion and renewal that filled my days with purpose and promise. Thank you for joining me in sharing this story, and for witnessing the journey of resilience, honesty, and empowerment. If you found inspiration in this tale, please like, subscribe, and share. It means the world, and it helps more people discover stories of courage and growth. Together, we can celebrate the strength of those who rise,